Hi, it's Dre Griggs with Obsidian Wisdom. Today we discuss strategies for maximizing equity in today's inflationary environment. All right, let's break it down real quick. We know that inflation has been nipping at the heels. We know that the cost of things that are going up. We're trying to figure out what to do with the equity that we're sitting on. This could be equity in your home. It could be equity in your business. It could be equity in your stocks. Today, we'll discuss 5 practical strategies for maximizing your equity in times of inflation. First, we'll discuss leveraging equity while rates are manageable. So, inside of your home, you know that you have equity. For those that don't know, you have a value of your home. As the value goes up, there is a difference between how much you have left of debt and how much your home is worth. If you sell your home, that is one way to take advantage of the equity in your home. If your house is worth $500,000, and you have $250,000 left, the assumption is that you will have $250,000 of equity that you can access. Now, it changes a little bit where you can access obviously 100% of your equity if you sell your home. But if you're not looking to sell your home, then you would access your equity by refinancing your home, or if you paid it off, getting a mortgage on your home. And you would have to determine a couple of things. First off, you have to decide whether or not you actually want to refinance your entire first mortgage. And for many of you, you probably have an interest rate that is lower than the current interest rates. So that makes it a little bit dicey, where you don't want to refinance your entire home that maybe you have a 3.5% for something that currently is closer to a 4.5 to 5%. Because naturally, the math is saying that I'm refinancing a portion of my debt for a higher interest rate. Ideally, we don't want to do that. That then lends itself for someone who's interested in accessing the equity in their home to say, well, how about a second mortgage? Whether that second mortgage is a traditional second mortgage, which is basically another fixed income mortgage payment where it's a set amount, you get an extra 30, 50, $100,000 out. They tell you what that monthly payment is, and you pay that over the term of the loan. The other version of a second mortgage would be called a HELOC, a home equity line of credit. Now, there were some changes in the last Tax Cut Job Act of, I think, 2018, where you don't get to just write off every expense that you put inside of your HELOC because it has to now be something that is used to improve the value of the house. But back in the day, people would refinance all of their credit card debt and they would move that inside of their mortgage payment and they would get a HELOC. So now you have all your credit cards inside of one payment. It's your own consolidation loan. And as a result, you end up freeing a lot of cash flow, which is just your monthly bill goes down. And generally speaking, you have a lower interest rate with a secure loan, which is secured against your house. You also sometimes were able to take advantage of the option of being able to write off some of the interest as you made those payments. So it was a strategy that a lot of people were using. As with most things, if the government doesn't like what you're doing, the government will step in and ban it at some point in time. We really get distracted by the pros or the benefits of the bills that's passed. But I think we all high level know that there are literally thousands of pages on these different bills. And while they're adding some things on the front end, hey, we cut taxes, blah, 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 there are things on the back pages that they are removing, eliminating, and shoring up. That was one of the things that they removed, eliminated, and shored up. They said you're not allowed to count that interest reduction on your mortgage payment if that HELOC is not used in some way to improve your home. But it doesn't change the fact that you can get a lower interest rate and free up some of your cash flow by lowering your monthly payment by consolidating that bill. So the benefit is I'm able to access the equity in my home without selling my home. So I can keep the home and I can access the equity. The risk, of course, is I may not have any equity. And that's why a lot of mortgage companies stopped offering HELOCs, because what would happen is the people would essentially, let's say that they had $250,000 of equity. Most mortgage companies won't go over 80% loan to value in traditional mortgages. And sometimes because of the risk of being the second in line, when you're the second mortgage and the HELOC would be the second mortgage, that means that if something happened to you and the house was foreclosed on, whatever that house sold for, the first mortgage gets paid off first completely. And if there's anything left, the second mortgage is paid off. Now, sometimes there's more than enough equity, but a lot of times the second mortgage doesn't go as high of a loan to value. That's what that LTV is. So they'll say, we'll go 75% of the loan to value. So for example, to make the math easy for me, if you had a $1 million home and your second mortgage said, we're willing to go up to 75% of your loan to value, your house mortgage is currently at $500,000. So we'll give you $250,000. You can access half of the equity that you had left. The other $250,000, that's our safety blanket because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. And we don't want to give you 100% loan to value because if this house value goes down and we're on the hook, we would like to get our money back. The issue that we run into is if you use the equity in your home to pay off debt, that's generally, economically speaking, money that's already spent. It doesn't even count as economic growth, right? Or like you paid off debt. You already spent that money last year. So if you're paying that off, that counts towards last year's spending. It doesn't even count. And in many ways, if I'm taking money out of my home equity, the idea of me using a strategy to keep up with inflation requires me to have a return that outpaces inflation. Now, we could technically get fancy and say, well, technically speaking, my interest rate was 30% and now it's 7.5%. And that means that I made a 22% return. And I could be like, sure, I could see the math. I could see exactly what you were thinking there. But the risk of not having something that we're actually investing in that's growing and keeping up with inflation, i.e., investing in a business, investing in a rental property, investing in the stock market in general, that a lot of the times that means that since I'm not keeping up with inflation, I'm not able to really pay off that second mortgage. And if I reuse it to pay off other debt, what I've seen happen is now you're 10 years into your home equity line and you still have a balance. You have not been able to pay it off, which now means that your equity is constantly tied up unless the values keep going up a lot. And that's why a lot of mortgage companies stopped even offering HELOCs because people would pay them off and then they would put more bills on it and then they would pay it off and put more bills on it, or they put bills on it and then more bills and then more bills. And now the equity is constantly tied up. They're never actually paying off the mortgage. So you want to be very, very careful when you access a home equity line, a HELOC, because a lot of times people end up paying off the first mortgage and they still have the HELOC. And I know it's ideally meant for emergencies. It is fantastic. I know some people will say, well, you can get approved now and then you have it set aside for emergencies. All these things are true, but the warning is still the same. The warning is if you get in the habit of using your HELOC like it really is a credit card, even though it is a lower interest rate, you have tied up your equity for 10, 15, 20, 30 years, and you probably don't actually want to have a mortgage payment for your entire rest of your working career and into your retirement. So you want to generally be very careful when we talk about that. If we want to take the money out, we have a solid business idea and it's going to generate a return that allows me to pay back myself from that investment. That's one thing. If I just want to pay off my debt because I need to free up the cash flow because I'm in a really rough spot, okay, that's another thing. If I just want to maintain my ongoing lifestyle, I would say, whoa, let's just pause real quick. Do we want to fund our lifestyle with the risk of losing our home? Because that's really what the risk is. We really have to think strongly and hard about this. We don't necessarily want to be maintaining our consistent lifestyle with our home equity. We would like to have opportunities to invest in that get a return in 3 to 5 years. We would like to be able to free up the cash flow to get out of debt, again, in like that 3 to 5 years, 10 years tops. But we don't want to find ourselves making that decision over and over and over again. Number two, we're going to talk about rebalancing your investment portfolio. If we want to keep up with inflation, we know that there's a handful of places that we can do this. The three asset classes that I always talk about, how three streams of income is what 65% of self-made millionaires have. So if I'm now looking in the investing in the stock market, I know that there are certain sectors that perform better during times of high inflation than others. And high level, these are sectors where I have the ability to pass on my higher costs to the consumer. Energy is a great example of that. People still have to put gas in their car. Even if the gas price doubles tomorrow, we'll be mad, we'll be furious, but we will probably still drive a vehicle. Even if we said, you know what, I'm going to take the bus still has to put gas in its vehicle. So energy is something that we don't have the ability to just turn off. We can limit it, but we still have to use it. Healthcare is another great sector to invest in during times of high inflation. If I have to go to the doctor, I got to go. If I have medicine that keeps me alive, I got to buy it. I have to take that medicine. And we know that no matter what's going on, if there is vaccines I got to take, if there's a disease that's going around, if people are getting sick, all of these things, we have to then spend our money on healthcare first and foremost. Whether we're being born and we need our medicine or whether we're retiring and we need our medicine, if we need it, we need it. You could also look at investing in real estate, and we'll come back around to real estate, but we do have REITs, real estate investment trust. You can invest in those inside the stock market where we shift our portfolio, we rebalance. The very famous way of saying is I would sell in my sectors that normally are performing well in non-inflationary times, and I would buy in sectors preparing for the inflation. If you're a more active manager, then that would be the approach that we would take. We would look at the data and we would say, look, based on what I'm seeing, there's probably going to be a recession in the next year or two. We're not trying to time it like literally like, "Ah, I think it's going to be next week." No, we don't know if it's going to be next week. But we know that generally a recession comes once every 10 years. We know high level economically speaking that tariffs raise the prices of things. And if the price of things are raised in a variety of sectors, literally all of them, then that makes things unaffordable for the average person, which is going to impact those markets negatively. And so if I know these things, then there are certain sectors where I can say, you're going to perform poorly in the recession. Because if you're trying to figure out what's going to cause the next recession, we normally can see the rumblings along the way, right? We know that the last recession was during COVID. If you're thinking high level, what would be someone that benefits during COVID? Well, we know that consumer staples, people still have to buy toilet paper. We also know that vaccines were going to be super important. So we know that healthcare will be a great sector. Hospitals and different things, we know that they're going to perform better. When we talked about the H1B1, the bird flu or swine flu, I forget which one it was in 2010. Well, people again started investing a lot in being healthy. So we can look at these different events. And then when you go to the Great Recession of 2008, we knew that what? Financial sectors and real estate were going to do the worst. So those sectors we would shift out of. All we're simply saying is if we're keeping up with the news, we have a general understanding of what is going to cause the recession. Are we fortune tellers? No, we're not fortune tellers. Do we have to be? Great news is you don't have to be a fortune teller. But when people are talking about the same thing for months and years, it ends up being a self-fulfilling prophecy in many ways. That even if you don't think it's a big deal, if everybody's talking about it, consumer sentiment changes, and then people start acting on that belief, whether it's founded or not, and it creates the environment that creates the result. And so when these recessions come, we can automatically say, well, COVID, we're going to close everything down. Probably not a great time to invest in travel cruises. And so you would shift out of those sectors. I know I make light of it, and it's very easy when you're looking back at something, but this is what we will be doing. We will be shifting our investment portfolio into sectors that we believe will perform well based on the situation that we are talking about now. And generally speaking, it's always going to be beneficial to be in healthcare. People almost always still need healthcare, and they're phenomenal American healthcare companies, so we probably won't have the tariff impact there. We know that electronics and IT, that if you find companies that are in Silicon Valley, they're probably going to do really well. But if you find ones that have to bring stuff in from overseas, well, then they might not do as well. But at the same time, if you see that they're in reinvesting in the U.S. infrastructure, like the Taiwan chip making company, then you could say, well, that company is going to be excluded. They're going to be okay. And again, it's not that you have to literally be watching the ticker every single day, but if you wanted to have an active approach where you're making these adjustments as we're coming into times of inflation, you could just read the headlines. And that's true. You take a look at the headlines, see where the rumbling is at, and then based off of that, you kind of have an idea of what sectors we believe are going to be negatively impacted. And then if we're not sure, we just stay completely out of it. We keep our money in cash. That's what Warren Buffett does, well known for doing that. He sits his money on the sidelines. He sold out of all of his positions, or at least the majority of them, that he felt would be negatively impacted by the tariffs. And he's sitting and waiting. And then as prices go down, because they always do, he's going to buy back in to these positions of great long-term investments. Long-term, we normally are saying, oh, look at their revenue, their sales year over year, their profits, their PE ratio. We look at their debt overall, what sector they're in, and how I think that sector will perform in a tariff-ridden environment. And then based off of that, I would choose the investments that I'm going to make. And so Warren Buffett is sitting with his list. He's waiting for prices to come to a certain amount, and he's going to invest in those businesses. If you want a strategy to outpace inflation, then investing in sectors that perform well during a recession and times of high inflation would most likely be the great position for you to put yourself in. Number 3 on our list is investing in real assets. So real, tangible, I can hold it in my hands assets. Normally, if you have equity in a business or equity in a stock, then shifting to assets that perform well during times of inflation is normally going to be real estate, because we know when inflation is high, The values of properties go up with inflation. You may also find opportunities to invest in things like farmland or even gold and silver and other precious metals. That in times of high inflation, real assets normally perform better. Because why? Because psychologically, what we're thinking is this money wasn't real anyways. The only value that the dollar has is my belief that it has value. That I believe if I take it today, I can give it to someone else tomorrow, and it's supposed to hold my value, it's supposed to be a medium of exchange. And as a result, I believe in it, and so I can spend it. And I believe other people will accept it. So I accept it because I believe I can give it to someone else later for something that I want. If you lose the value, if we are starting to say high inflation, I don't know if the dollar is going to make it. I heard and I read that we're off the gold standard. We have $37 trillion in debt, and that most countries trade in oil. I'm worried that if a bunch of countries said, I will no longer trade barrels in dollars, then that makes the US dollar kind of just floating in the ether, right? So you're like, well, dang, what would happen then? If that is a concern, then people will start investing in assets that do hold their value, even if the dollars I have don't. Think of it when all those sanctions and stuff started happening to Russia when the war with Ukraine started. When the war with Ukraine started, people were getting rid of rupees as quick as they got them because they were like, the rupees are losing value. If I hold them for a day, tomorrow it's worth half the value. People were freaking out. Now, that is what your purchasing power is from inflation. If all these companies were leaving Russia, and then we were like, well, dang, then the rubies and the sanctions, everybody was literally like, man, I got to get rid of these rubies because I'd rather have a loaf of bread than hold on to these rubies. That would be sort of that same idea, but obviously on a smaller scale. If I'm worried that my dollars aren't holding a value, then I'm going to invest in things that do. And real estate holds its value, gold holds its value, precious metal holds its value, farmland, things like that, they hold their value. So if I can invest in real assets, they would almost always go up during times of inflation because if inflation is happening, that means I have less faith in my fiat currency, right? That's what we call it. It just means it's money that doesn't have a value outside of the fact that we gave it its value, right? A commodity currency is like it's a commodity. So gold has a value outside of the fact that I have a gold coin available. You can melt the gold and be just fine. Fiat currency just means it doesn't have a value outside of the government that gave it its value. And so we would sit there and say, well, I want to put my money in something that always has value. And that is going to be real assets. So if you want a strategy to help you outpace inflation, then investing in the assets that perform better when there are times of high inflation where people have to put their money somewhere, and they will love to put their money in precious metals and gold, silver, land, different things like that, because they know that that will maintain its value better than the currency possibly losing its value with times of high inflation. Number 4 on the list is building equity in your business. So if you have your own company, you know that you have the ability to pull multiple levers. And one of them is you could increase your product line, but you could also increase the marketing and exposure you have with the products you already have. Or you can do cost cutting measures where you lower the cost. There are so many things you can do, but the idea is this is a great time for me to reinvest in my business. That if I'm worried about putting my money in the stock market, if I'm worried about putting my money in real estate or different things, if I access the equity in my stocks or in my home or something like that, and I reinvest in my business, it gives me an opportunity to exponentially grow my business. Ideally, you have a business that is able to raise its prices in times of high inflation. If we can pass the cost on, and that's true with really any business, that means that I'm able to maintain my margins. And my margins is just how much profit I take home. If I can maintain my profits and generate more revenue, or at a minimum, if I can keep the same profits, but I serve fewer clients or I have to sell fewer widgets where it lowers my cost of goods or my cost of service, then I'm normally going to find myself in a pretty good situation. One that I can take advantage of these times of high inflation. That reinvesting in my business gives me that. Now, naturally, it's always important to keep in mind, how soon do I need the money? And when we're talking about all of these strategies, we're really talking about from a long-term investing approach, which generally means that I need at least 5 years of runway because I need the opportunity for my investment to possibly lose money and then to make it back and grow some. If I need my money in a year, then we wouldn't be making these decisions. We need to keep our money very liquid. You probably wouldn't even touch our equity altogether. But if you're someone who has equity, and you're concerned about what inflation is doing and whether there's opportunities you can take advantage of, then this is when you would say, all right, let me reinvest in my business. Hopefully, this is not a business idea, but a business that you already have. Because when we're talking about reinvesting equity that we already have in our business or home or the stock market in general, it implies that I'm investing in something that is a low likelihood of me losing money. It's not that it's a slam dunk 100%, I won't lose anything, but it is that, man, that would be very surprising if that didn't work out for me. I don't want you out here going to Vegas and putting everything on red or putting everything on black and then just gambling with it. Because if that, I would just leave the equity alone. I would just let it keep on keeping on. But if you have an opportunity to take advantage of inflation, because as I always tell you all, it's not that any economic environment, any circumstance is 100% going to create all losers. That's just not how it works. Just like there's not a circumstance in an economic environment that creates 100% winners, that in every climate, there are winners and losers. That there are people who are sitting through this recession who are going to make more money than they ever made, right? Look up Bill Ackerman with the COVID. He had made a bet against the stock market when COVID was first starting to come out. I think he bet like $12 million and made $3 billion. Yeah, billion with a B. And so that was his best year ever for his hedge fund. And then, yes, there were several companies that went away and never came back. So my kids' daycare at the time was one of those where that daycare, it went away and it never came back, right? So COVID stopped, people were able to go back, and the person never opened the business back up. That is all we're simply saying, that there's not an environment that guarantees any outcome. Is the plan that we have and the actions that we put in place and the comfort that we have executing on that plan. So if you have the ability to reinvest in your business, to grow your business, you'll find, historically speaking, I think the largest sector of millionaires are business owners. Now, of course, we talked about working, it's like healthcare, it's engineers, and you can go down to the financial industry, different things like that. But we're talking about business owners as a group, they're number one. That most of our millionaires are business owners. That if you look at the wealthiest people list and all the billionaires and that Forbes follows and things like that, 9 out of 10 of them are business owners. So if you have a business that is successful, one that is pretty consistent in its income, then reinvesting in your business is a great opportunity, because more times than not, that business, when you reinvest the money, it's totally going to grow by more than inflation, right? Inflation is like 3%. Most of the businesses that I see people working in, those businesses are growing double digits on a regular basis. They are just figuring things out. They're becoming better entrepreneurs. They're building relationships and networks. They understand the industry so much more. And as a result, if you have the equity and you can reinvest it in your business, it's almost like betting on yourself in many ways. And there are lots of examples of very successful entrepreneurs who do that. Now, naturally, the caveat is there are lots of examples of very unsuccessful entrepreneurs doing it too. And that there is a risk anytime that you take your equity out. And ideally, we're able to limit the risk by the prep time that we put in ahead of time. And our fifth and final approach for maximizing equity during times of inflation is not letting our money sit idle. There is this feeling that, all right, my house value has gone up, my business value has gone up, my stock value has gone up. I'm just going to kind of leave it alone. And that's the feeling that we have, that if I do nothing, I lose nothing. I just keep everything the way it is. But the reality is, if we're not accounting for inflation, as you know, just a couple years ago, we are at 40-year high with double-digit inflation, which means that the value of your equity was decreasing during that time by that 10% every single year that inflation stayed that way. And if you put your money in a mattress or in a safe and you just leave your equity in your home, if the value of your home goes up or down, the equity goes up and down. If you have the opportunity for your equity to stay where it's at and it can keep up or even outpass inflation, then we would probably leave it there. But if you're not keeping up with inflation, that things are stagnant, they're not really moving, inflation just has a rough hit on your home values in your area or your business or your stock portfolio, then you would need to really be thinking strongly about one of the strategies that we mentioned. You should be considering, is this the time for me to make some adjustment? We don't have to go all in. We don't have to sell all of anything. But should I be considering whether it would make sense for me to make some sort of a move? We talk about this all the time. There are economic environments where you have economic growth and stocks perform well during economic growth. But at the very top of economic growth is when you start finding high inflation, because everybody's making money hand over fist. All the shelves are being empty because everybody's getting rich. Everybody can quit one job and get a 20% raise tomorrow at a new job. My home value, I bought it last year and it went up 10%. I sold it next year. That is what creates those times of high inflation, times of high, hot economic growth. But then right after that, we have what? We have the decline. We go into the recession. And then at some point, we hit the floor. We call it the trough. And then you go back to expansion and growth. And then you peak again. And we go through that same economic cycle over and over and over again. If you find yourself at the very top peak of the mountain, and you're saying, you know what, I should probably change for the upcoming economic climate, whatever that looks like, between your home or your business or your investments in the market, then you want to make sure you have that plan in place. We don't want to be reacting. We want to be confident and comfortable. We want to be prepared. We have the same four economic climates, like seasons of the year. Could you imagine someone being like, what happens after fall? You'll be like, what? After fall comes winter. And then after that comes spring. And I'm like, man, wouldn't it be cool if we could have 2 winters in a row? Yeah, but I don't know if it would be cool, but I know it doesn't work that way. That's the way it is with economic climates. They're like, oh man, what happens after economic growth? Well, it peaks and then we have a recession. They're like, really? Why can't it just grow forever? That's not how it works. It doesn't grow forever. That's not an option. Okay, so what should I do in a recession? Aha. When you're getting ready for a recession, when you're talking about high inflation, then this is the type of strategies that we will put in place. And then when that season comes, you're ready. And then what happens after that? Well, obviously, we don't drop forever. Eventually, it flattens out. We call that the trough. And then we go back to economic growth. You're like, really? I'm like, yeah, really. It's just like the seasons. You go from winter to spring. You go from recession to expansion. They're like, wow, I never thought of it that way. And I'm like, I know. But you will now. You'll have the mindset that helps you to make the right decision because we know that there is opportunities always available. Now, without knowing your unique situation, obviously I can't tell you which strategy, if any, you should take. But if you're interested in having a conversation where I can learn about you and your unique situation, so I can tell you what I think makes the most sense for you, I put a link in the show notes to my calendar, or you can reach out and you can get my new book, Wealthy Retirement Wisdom, where I go through a variety of strategies in a variety of economic climates and situations to give you the information that you need, because we all have had that feeling that if I knew then what I knew now feeling. So I want to give you all that information now so that you can be well prepared with the wisdom you need to achieve your goals. Now, for those that have purchased the book already, first of all, I want to thank you. I do appreciate it. I've seen that there's been purchases. Only thing I'm asking of you is to go online and write a review, please. It will help immensely. It'll let me know that you're enjoying. And if you didn't like it, that's fine. Write a review. Let me know what I can improve for the next one. As always, I'm thankful for the time that you spent with me. Until next time, I'm Dre Griggs with Obsidian Wisdom. Stay safe and enjoy life.